Last week I covered the case of Cindy Warner in Granite Bay, California. Cindy was brazenly abducted from her sister's home in front of her 11-month-old baby. Investigators believe she was kept alive for 2 weeks and then strangled to death and left in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. If you haven't listened to that episode, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to it so that you have full context and understanding of the area and occurrences happening there at the time. But Cindy wasn't the only Granite Bay woman abducted and murdered in the early 1990s. In this week's episode, part 2, I'm going to share the case of an elementary school teacher who stayed late in her classroom to clean up after her classroom's Halloween party. One minute, a school custodian saw her sweeping up popcorn and packing up her things, and the next, she was just gone. A school and community would be left heartbroken when she was found dead on Halloween night. After more than 30 years, investigators might be closer than ever to holding the answers to who killed Cherilyn. Despite both Cindy and Cherilyn being murdered in a small community by strangulation less than 2 years apart, investigators do not believe the cases are related. While Cindy is believed to have been killed by a complete stranger, when it comes to Cherilyn, investigators believe she knew and trusted whoever ended her life on that fall day. This is A Simpler Time True Crime, the murder of Cherilyn Hawkley. Before I get started on the story today, I just wanted to apologize in advance for a little bit of intermittent background noise you might hear today. There is work being done in my neighborhood, and unfortunately, this is my window of time to record, so I appreciate in advance your patience. Hopefully, it's not too distracting. Cherilyn Hawkley was born March 19, 1954 in Whittier, California. As a young child, she relocated to the North Valley area of California, spending much of her youth growing up in a small town called Paradise. In 1972, she graduated from Pleasant Valley High School. Cherilyn married a man named Royal Hawkley, which I just think is the coolest name ever. From what I can tell, based on piecing together all the timelines and source material, it seems like she stayed home for a bit to raise her kids. Either that or she had a job in a completely other field because she didn't graduate with her teaching degree until 1990. So prior to all that, she gave birth to 3 children, daughters Melissa and Heather, and then a son named Ryan. Royal owned a heating and air conditioning business in Chico, California, which is where Cherilyn went back to college, at Chico State University. She finished her degree and graduated with honors. After that, she jumped right into her teaching career. She got a job right out of school at Durham Intermediate School in Chico and was a well-loved teacher. Her former students and colleagues described her as one of those teachers who just had a very unique way of doing things and engaging learners. She was one of those artsy and creative teachers, which those were my favorite type. I'm picturing those teachers now that I had, and it just sounds like she kind of fit that bill. During this particular stretch of time, her 15-year marriage to Royal came to an end. I just want to say that the details on this don't really matter. I don't know why they split, and it's not really relevant to what happened to her. And I'm going to do something preemptively that I normally wouldn't do just because it's kind of telling the story out of order, but Royal has an ironclad alibi for her murder and for what goes on to happen to her. He was nowhere near where this happened. He was completely cleared, passed a polygraph, and it sounds like in the immediate aftermath of her disappearance, he was quite concerned for her safety. So I don't know if they had an amicable divorce, but from what I can tell, no matter what, he was able to set things aside and show concern for her when something happened. So anyways, Cherilyn used this as an opportunity to start completely fresh. She moved 80 miles south to Roseville. She purchased a home and started teaching at Eureka Elementary School in Granite Bay, where she was a 5th grade teacher. Her district superintendent, Ronald Feist, would later say, quote, "This was sort of a new beginning for her. She was an outstanding teacher. She was an amiable, lovable, very upbeat person, and everything was going wonderfully for her here." End quote. Cherilyn had 25 students who adored having her as their teacher. In an interview with ABC News 10, her daughter Heather recounts her landing this job. Quote, "I know that she was very good at loving people and showing people that love, and I think her students felt how much she loved them. She was very, very excited to get that job in the Sacramento area. There was a lot of people trying to get that job, and she was the one that secured that spot, and it was really exciting for her. And as a child, I was super happy for her, even though she was farther away." End quote. Cherilyn was known to be very friendly and social. She made friends in her new town and began dating someone. I mentioned she was artsy, but she was also very musical. She sang, did theater, played guitar, and played the piano. There's a picture of her with her guitar on our Instagram page, @SimplerTimeCrimePod. Likely because of their age and attending school, Cherilyn's children remained living primarily with Royal, but she was extremely devoted as a mother and kept in close contact with her kids. Friday, October 29th, 1993 was a regular school day. Well, as I'm sure my teacher friends would say, not a regular school day, but a typical crazy Friday before a holiday. Her fifth graders were off the wall and waiting for the day to wind down so they could jump into their big trick-or-treating weekend. Cherilyn had lunch with a colleague that day in the teacher's lounge, and this person reported that she seemed totally normal. In the afternoon, students were able to have a Halloween party and trick-or-treat from classroom to classroom. The school day dismissed, and Cherilyn was left with the tornado aftermath of the party, as I'm sure, again, my teacher friends can relate to, as well as the weekend wrap-up. She also met with another teacher at 4:30 that day. The teacher also conveyed Cherilyn was exhausted but upbeat and had a great demeanor. Nothing seemed out of sorts and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. This teacher was important to the timeline because that person left school at 6:30 p.m. and said that they did not see Cherilyn's vehicle in the parking lot. She stayed late after school. Her boyfriend wasn't surprised by this, and he knew she had a really busy day. He was just expecting her home that evening. Colleagues saw Cherilyn as they all made their way out the door for their weekend, and eventually it was pretty much just Cherilyn and the custodial staff, along with that other teacher. In fact, one such custodian said he was making his rounds cleaning when he saw her cleaning up popcorn off the floor of her classroom. This was at 5:30 p.m. Likely grateful for her doing so, he continued on, and when he made his way back around 6, she was gone. He also indicated he didn't see her vehicle outside at that point either. Now, of course, this wasn't surprising to the custodian because they were expecting Cherilyn to leave. But her boyfriend was alarmed because the clock just kept ticking and Cherilyn wasn't coming home. So he waited, and he waited, but when she didn't come home, he drove to the school to look for her. Her car wasn't there, but he went inside and talked to that night custodian, who reported exactly what I just said and what he had seen. This wasn't sitting right, so he called police immediately and let Cherilyn's father know. I couldn't find in the sources if a police report was ever officially filed, and I think there was, but there wasn't any sort of big media blast out to the TV stations because there's no news articles or old publications from that time about her being a missing person. It does just seem like police kind of went out on the lookout for her, but the general public didn't know about this until, unfortunately, she was found. In an interview years later, her daughters said they tried not to think the worst at first. Even though by all accounts she seemed really content, she had just gone through some major life changes, so they just tried to believe that maybe she was collecting herself and taking a couple of days away. But that hope would be dashed on Halloween Day, when an officer on patrol made an awful discovery. That Halloween evening, Placer County Sheriff's Deputy Jeff Adams was out on patrol. Amongst his other duties, he was keeping an eye out for any sign of Cherilyn Hawkley or her 1990 Dodge Caravan. Because it was Halloween, He was also going into more neighborhoods as a way of keeping an eye on children and trick-or-treating festivities. One such turn is Elmhurst Drive, a wooded residential neighborhood about a mile from the school. It's also adjacent to another intermediate school. As he's driving, a vehicle catches his eye. It's pulled off to the side of the road and in a brush area. I have a picture of this scene on the Instagram page. He cautiously approaches it and peers inside. There, lying in the back seat, is a body, lifeless. Deputy Adams had found Cherilyn Hawkley. She had been strangled, and the rope or cord was found in close proximity to her body. Cherilyn was dead at just 39 years old. The community was devastated. For being so small and safe, this was another crime in a string of others that left residents second-guessing the notion that this couldn't happen in their small town. Not only was there Cindy Warner and Veronica Martinez, who we covered in the last episode, there was also another woman in late 1991. In neighboring Roseville, Suzette Willis had gone down to the creek to drink a couple of beers at the end of a night out. She was social but enjoyed her solitude too, and often could be found doing this. She'd go out to bars and shoot some pool, hang out, socialize, and then sometimes she would take her Honda off-road and she would go sit and drink beers by the side of the creek by herself. So she did this one night, and the following day she was found brutally bludgeoned by a large rock and left in the creek. Teenagers discovered her body, and just like the others, her case is another that has not been solved to this day. Neighborhood watch communities had been popping up, but after Cherilyn's disappearance, the local chapter responsible for training and certifying neighborhood watch groups reported an influx so great they couldn't keep up. Placer County Undersheriff Ed Bonner said in an interview in November of 1993, quote, "We are not used to this. Lord help us if we ever get used to it. But all of us need to be keenly aware of our personal protection. There are not enough cops on the streets to ensure the public safety of everybody," end quote. The neighborhood took his message to heart. Joy Birch, a resident of the area, chaired a project called Project Apprehend and put out word of a town meeting on November 2nd. Within 5 hours, more than 250 people attended. That's pretty impressive when you think about it. This is 1993, so there isn't some Facebook event created. There's no internet to help spread the word. This is just pure advocacy, word of mouth, and of course, the phone tree. Investigators worked the hundreds of tips that came in, but within a couple of days of the disappearance, they released information on a person they were interested in speaking to. They said this person wasn't a suspect, but they thought they might have information. Witnesses whom investigators deemed highly credible stated that they saw a man they were unfamiliar with entering Eureka Elementary School around the time of Cherilyn's disappearance, between 4 to 5 p.m. on that Friday night, the 29th. There's a composite sketch I'll post, but he's described as being in his mid-30s in 1993, husky or a muscular build like a weightlifter, hairy arms and legs, and wavy brown hair just over his ears. He was wearing blue shorts and a faded and sweat-stained pink tank top. He was wearing sandals or he was barefoot. He drove a beat-up, faded, older Volkswagen Bug, which was parked at or near the school entrance. Black primer showed through the thinning paint, and the right front headlight was broken out. The left fender was dented. Police pleaded for this individual or anybody who could identify this individual to come forward just so they could talk to them. But nobody did, which, if this person had nothing to do with it, is a bit odd. That's a very specific description. I don't know how you would see that all over the news and not immediately be like, yeah, that's my Volkswagen and my sweaty pink tank top. Because nobody came forward, police went looking for them. One woman was so irritated from being pulled over so many times, she ended up putting a sign in her back window that just said, "I'm just a secretary and this car has been searched." Some source materials will say that this mystery Volkswagen muscle man was cleared, but from everything I can find, he wasn't cleared, he just wasn't ever found, which to me is a very distinct difference. But there were some people who were cleared, notably Royal Hawkley, who I mentioned, which is Cherilyn's ex-husband, but also her current boyfriend and all of her colleagues at school. You know, of course, when I was first reading through everything, my immediate thought was, okay, well, what about that janitor who last saw her? But from what the sheriffs put out there, he was cleared along with everybody else. Initially, police considered this to be a stranger abduction and sexually motivated. But that quickly shifted. Within a couple of months of the homicide, police would publicly state that they believed Cherilyn was murdered by someone acquainted with her. Now, acquainted with her is a kind of broad definition. It might mean it's somebody that maybe she went on a date with once, or somebody who just worked in close proximity to her. Obviously, we know the school people were eliminated, but maybe, someone from an other area school district who she's done professional development training or conferences with. Maybe it's somebody who is a neighbor or an area friend of hers that maybe they wanted something more in a relationship. The speculation is endless, but they don't come out to say, we think this person was a romantic partner, which sometimes when police want to really emphasize that, they say something like, this seems to be a crime of passion. It seems to be someone who, the whole overkill piece, but they don't really mention that at all, and they just kind of leave it at acquaintance. In the months after the murder, they went on to say she wasn't sexually assaulted, as I mentioned, and her purse and belongings were left in the van with her. It was thought that possibly Cherilyn got into her van after leaving school and that someone was waiting for her in the van. So that classic thing you're picturing where someone's hiding out and you get in and suddenly they pop up behind you. That was considered a possibility, and I don't know that they ruled that out. It was also considered that the man in the Volkswagen who entered the school might have abducted her right from her classroom. But one thing that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me with the Volkswagen guy is, what did he do with his own vehicle if he abducted her and took her away in her van? Because the witnesses who reported seeing it said it was only there, the Volkswagen, I should specify, that the Volkswagen was only there for a short period of time. So if you have any ideas how he could have pulled this off, comment. Because I'm really curious about that for the discussion. There's possibly something I'm not thinking of, but the more I think about it, the more it just doesn't seem very plausible. You can comment on the episode wherever you're listening to this podcast, or join in on the discussion on our Instagram page at Simpler Time Crime Pod, or over on the Facebook page, A Simpler Time True Crime Podcast. The autopsy showed that Cherilyn died within 24 hours of her disappearance. And remember how I shared that the boyfriend reported her missing, but nothing went out to the media until after her body was found? Maybe if they had publicized it sooner, her body could have been located sooner, because joggers and soccer players from the local school reported seeing the van parked there Saturday morning. They didn't think much of it, and they certainly didn't know that there was a dead body inside. Can you imagine? I'm so glad it was police and not a random child on their way to soccer practice who found her. So given what we know and can piece together, it seems like probably the very same night she was abducted was when she was killed. And police go as far as to say that's what they think happened too. They don't believe she ever really got out of that 1 mile radius after leaving school. The early momentum they felt with the case soon crashed into a dead end. There was physical evidence at the scene, and the officers collected and stored all the evidence, but in 1993, there wasn't a whole lot they could do with it. Investigators went up to Chico, California, where she had lived so many years of her life, and they interviewed people who were old friends of hers and family members to try to get a larger picture of her social life and network and understand who might have wanted to kill Cherilyn and why. But nobody had any ideas. She was seemingly one of those just universally loved people, and to this day the motive still is a challenge for investigators. After the department conducted more than 500 interviews in the first year, Sergeant Bob McDonald said, quote, "There is no apparent motive. We have a witness to nothing. We just know she didn't make it home from school, end quote. And that's how it sat for many years. In fact, it's still how it pretty much sits. As DNA advancements continued into the 2000s, Cherilyn's children hoped that a break would come in their mother's case. Years passed, but by 2015, the Placer County Sheriff's Detective Chris Joyce granted a rare interview on the case. Before that and after, they've been pretty tight-lipped about what information they have. Even on anniversary specials on local news stations, they refuse to comment. They just say they don't want to jeopardize the case. But in this 2015 interview, Joyce says, quote, "I think DNA in this case will probably be the bridge between solved and unsolved," end quote. He and a person named Detective Madison returned to the crime scene for evidence that may have been overlooked and could now be forensically examined. I don't know about you, but that was mind-blowing to me. I know that DNA advancements have come a long way, but the thought that you could go back to the scene of a crime, particularly in this residential neighborhood, and try to find something all these years later, I mean, I give them a ton of credit for even trying to do that, and I really hope it paid off for them. They also went through all the old evidence they had from the past 22 years prior, including the rope she was strangled with, and submitted it for a fresh DNA analysis, and they hoped that it would help lead them to their suspect. They also shared that they were painstakingly re-examining the murder book. If you listen to a lot of true crime podcasts or watch a lot of true crime documentaries, you're probably familiar with what a murder book is. But if you're not, it's usually the name of what investigators call the documentation they keep that includes everything, every interview they've ever conducted, crime scene photos, sketches, autopsy and forensic reports, transcripts, individualized investigators' notes, witness interviews, anything you can think of. It's like their literal murder scrapbook. Detective Madison said, quote, "Basically, it's thousands of pages in multiple books. It's every statement, report, newspaper clipping, card ever sent to the department, every interview ever done. It literally runs to 30 pounds of paper. The advantage to that is that the information you need is in that case somewhere. The suspect's statement is in there." Detective Joyce chimed in by saying, "Now we have the ability to incorporate scientific evidence into those statements to either contradict or corroborate someone's statements, which gives us the ability to say, 'You're absolutely lying. You lied to us back then. You're lying to us now.'" In that episode of Crime Watch Daily, they also dropped a bombshell. They said verbatim that they think they know who did this. But that's coming up on 9 years ago, and nobody's been arrested. It brings me to the idea that, maybe much like Cindy's case, they may need witness statements to corroborate the evidence they have. So if you're someone who may have information that could help do that, now's the time to come forward. Police said back in 1993 that it's possible this person may have bragged to someone that with time that person would come forward and do the right thing, hopefully. In the meantime, Cherilyn's children have had to grow up without their mother. They reminisce about reading chapter books with her and busting out singing to Whitney Houston while cleaning. Her daughters shared the grief of welcoming their own children into the world and becoming mothers themselves without having their own mom around to ask those questions about motherhood. Melissa said, quote, "When I think of Mom, I think of butterflies, calligraphy, art projects. Mom is just super loving and so giving. I love that she read us stories. We would read chapter books. She was super involved in the community and church. Just an amazing, amazing woman." End quote. When asked about what solving the case would do for her, she said that while nothing could bring her mother back, it would help in that to some degree they've lived in fear all of these years, knowing that the killer's still out there, so it could give them peace of mind and squelch their fear. There is hope that Cherilyn's killer will be apprehended soon. With forensic genealogy, it's likely only a matter of time. Detective Joyce was asked one final question in his 2015 interview with Crime Watch Daily. The question was, Do you think the suspect's name is in that murder book? To which he replied, I think so, absolutely. If you have any information on the murder of Cherilyn Hawkley, please contact the Placer County Sheriff's Office at 530-889-7854. This has been A Simpler Time True Crime. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, please leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts and follow us on our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you so much for listening.